Welcome, y'all. Welcome. Time to engage in some biblical analysis. We're ready for the next installment of the entire Bible series. We are lecturing through the entire Bible. And hopefully you guys can hear me. Let's make sure everything's good. I got my soy boy cup. It says happy everything. Happy everything. My soy boy cup. My fiance's boyfriend who got me my Twitch, my Nintendo Twitch, got me this happy everything cup. Everything's going good. What's up, nerds? All the Jay's Analysis nerds. Sound is good. All right. So I put in the chat there this week's article. I wrote a lengthy analysis of the last remaining issue with Roman Catholicism in terms of elucidating which texts and which dogmatic statements specify that you have to be in accordance with who the Roman Curia selects as the Pope. So some of those topics came up in the last debate, if you want to call it that. And I wanted to actually just have all of those listed. Now, Denzinger did come up in the debate, obviously, because of mistakes that related to some of the things that the opponent initially said. So there were some references to Denzinger that I mentioned in the debate that didn't make it into that essay that related to the older Roman Catholic doctrine of no salvation outside the church, unum sanctum, and then Denzinger 7:14, which says that there are no martyrs outside of the Roman communion. You have to be in communion with the Roman See to be a martyr or considered a martyr. And of course that has been changed, and that's no longer the case with Vatican II. In fact, I'll be making some videos in the next couple of days that relate to, we're going to have a video that's top 10 reasons why I'm not a Protestant. Everybody loves these top 10 videos. I think we can make good top 10 videos. I think we can encapsulate the chief problems in a very specific 20, 25 minute tight argument. So that's what we'll be doing. I guess have to put up some more politically minded videos as well, because we kind of strayed away from the politics because we knew they were going to clamp down on that stuff. But quite a few people are still allowed to discuss news and politics. I don't really understand how they're allowed to. Everybody else has to tremble in fear of getting deleted. So it's just, I don't know, it's just all very frustrating. And, we've done geopolitical analysis for years here. When Dr. Jordan Cooper declined, he said, we are conspiracy theorists. Oh, we just happened to interview, some of the top geopolitical analysts out there. We just happened to interview people that work in espionage and so forth. But no, it's all conspiracy theories. But we all know that Dr. Jordan Cooper didn't want to debate because he would lose. And in fact, his Protestant heresies would be exposed. And so in this regard, I think the best approach would be to try to cover all the bases in these tighter videos. I'm not going to stop doing the longer form content. This is always great, but we need to be able to match these clowns in their mass appeal videos. Remember that guy that made the Why I'm Not an Orthodox, and it got like 100,000 views, that goofy looking Carrot Top dude? Brian Carrot Top, or whatever his name is, with his dumb arguments. So we're going to address all these. I'm not calling the people dumb. I'm calling the arguments dumb. So we had a little bit of a tiff with Benny. We love Benny. Benny's our friend. We don't hate Benny. We were trying to say that the arguments that evangelicals use are dumb. And the comment section, not talking about Benny, I'm talking about just the endless spammers and stupid Protestants who spam the comments about trying to prove everything is pagan and everything is... Look, I've been here analyzing Illuminati stuff for over 11, 12, 13 years, right? I've been analyzing film, symbolism, these topics for a long time. And it's just basic level misunderstandings to characterize everything as one type of thing. And that's kind of the mistake that we get in a lot of these groups is the idea that anytime I see something that has a triangle, oh, it's the Illuminati. Anytime I see an eye, it's the all-seeing eye. Anytime I see, you name it, right? I thought of more examples too as I was thinking about that last video. One of the examples have you ever seen the Rosicrucian cross? Crowley's usage of the cross, right? There's this really weird, elaborate, I guess I could pull it up for you guys here. Let's look at the Rosicrucian cross here, and we'll see this esoteric symbol here with all of its jibber jabber and hobbledygobbledygook everywhere all over it. The name of God, the name of Christ, all this jibber jabber, right? Here's the Rosicrucian cross. Now, is this an Illuminati cross? Yes, it is. Okay. It's kind of obvious, right? Look at all this jibber jabber. You got your astrological symbols. You got your zodiac. You got all kinds of stuff on here, right? And so if you joined you got the Rosy cross. You got the Hebrew alphabet. You got all this jibber jabber on here, right? Now, if we look at that, there are actually, let's say, like, for example, Islamic people, Islamic apologists, they would look at that and say, the cross, right? The cross is Gnostic. Look at all the symbols. They use magic. Now, what would we say to that? We would say that's ridiculous because this is a cross incorporated into a magic system of Rosicrucians. It has nothing to do with Christianity itself being Rosicrucian. Rosicrucianism is a heresy, a weird sect that arose in Germany around the time of Luther, a little bit prior to Luther. Later, Lutherans actually had an interest in Rosicrucianism and the heresies of the Rosicrucians. And they were kind of a weird universalist alchemical sect, basically. They had these pacifist type views. And you can read about Johann Andre, who was influential in Lutheran circles. Some people think he was the author of the chief Rosicrucian text, right? Who cares? Doesn't matter ultimately who it was. But yes, Rosicrucian esotericism was influential in Lutheranism. Hence, the Luther rose having such an important significance there in the center to Rosicrucianism. Now, I don't know if Luther himself was a Rosicrucian. I'm not saying that. I don't know that anybody's given any significant, solid evidence of that. But Luther was, we know, influenced by the Theologica Germanica, which was a Neoplatonic kind of hermetic text of the late Middle Ages. So there were definitely influences and strands of influence, but you can't fall into these kind of overly simplistic things where people are like, look, there's the top pyramid, there's the Illuminati because it's in a pyramid, as if every instance of a dove is like, Crowley. The Crowleyan cult appropriates the dove. Does that mean that every time there's a dove, it's Crowleyanism? No, but that's how low IQ this stuff is. And again, I constantly it's just the endless stupidity in the comments is something to behold. It's a marvel to behold. By the way, thank you for that super chat there. We got almost 200 nerds. Feel free to support with the super chats. And Brian Holdsworth. That's the guy I was trying to think. Carrot Top. It's funny. All these people, none of them will do debates. It's funny. They love to do video drama, but they won't do any debates. We haven't challenged Brian Holdsworth, but I'm going to go ahead and assume that Brian Holdsworth is not going to do a debate. But I did want to address again a few points before we get started on Genesis. You'll notice there that I cited all of these multiple canon law instances from the 1917 Code of Canon Law that relate to the Roman Curia, what the Roman Curia is, what the Roman congregations are, and that you have to accept the Roman Curia and their decision of who the Pope is. You don't have the freedom, the liberty. You're not a libertine in the realm of Roman Catholicism who has the right to choose who you want. All right? You can't play Protestant with the Pope. It's just complete absurdity. And so I gave you there all of the citations from canon law that deal with that. And then I gave you the Apostolic Constitution of Pius X, and it is Apostolicae Vacante Sedis, right, which is about vacancies in the Apostolic See. And Pius X says, the right of electing the Roman pontiff pertains solely and exclusively to the cardinals of the Roman Church. And it says that they have excluded in every respect any intervention of any ecclesiastical dignity or lay power. No lay power has any ability to reject who the Roman Curia elects. And why is that? Because, as we showed in the essay, canon law tells you that the Roman Curia is one aspect of the Roman See, and you can't reject the Roman See. And we go on to show in Denzinger and other places that that's spelled out very clearly in Denzinger, 792, 1698, 1683, 1722 in Denzinger. And then we show that essentially the crux of the argument, we're going to get to Genesis. I just want to summarize this, which is the crux of the argument. And this comes from, as we put in the essay, from John Pontrello's book. The argument is actually really simple once you grasp it. I think a lot of people were confused and they didn't really get what the argument was, but I summarized it here. So if we look at Vatican I, the section of Vatican I known as Pastor Aeternus, and when we look at Roman Catholic dogma as it relates to the office of Peter, we'll see these features to be very clear. Peter's papacy is the underlying basis for unity. The primacy of Peter is perpetually bound to Rome, the See of Rome, and in some sense to the city of Rome. The office of the papacy is the position of primacy. A living Roman pontiff must exercise and fulfill this papacy, excluding the sparse periods of vacancies. These are symbiotic in order to realize the unity for which Christ instituted the papacy, the unity of the church, right? Purportedly, right? This is within the Roman Catholic system. I'm not arguing for this to be true. I'm arguing as a former Roman Catholic who is Orthodox. Now, when we look at that, then we consider that the thesis that the papacy can alter and change in its fundamental constitution or go away for 60, 70, 100 years is impossible in the Vatican I mindset. So the sedevacantist position is now left basically with no place to go. It's a dead-end position because it ultimately ends up being a denial of Vatican I and a denial of the essential constitution of the papacy. And these are as follows, according to Satis Cognitum, Mystici Corporis Christi, and Session 4 of Vatican I, which is known as Pastor Aeternus. The purpose of the church is the permanent duration of the work of redemption. The papacy is the foundation of the Roman Catholic Church. Rome, that is the city over in Italy, in terms of its spiritual inheritance, is the foundation of the papacy, right? So yes, technically, during the Avignon papacy, the See of Peter moved to France for 100 years, all of which is totally preposterous, by the way. But I'm just saying that to be fair to the Catholic position, yes, it is perpetually bound to Rome, even if it moves for a time period to another city. So we admit that. Sure, we understand that. Rome is the foundation of the papacy because Peter instituted his lineage there, and it supposedly is conferred upon his successors there. Although, by the way, the See of Antioch, which, if you attend an Antiochian Orthodox Church, it's founded by Peter and has successors of Peter as well. So this, of course, completely undermines the presupposition that Peter only has his descendants at Rome who are authoritative. It's total nonsense. The Roman pontiffs, Rome and its curia alone identify the valid pope. All right. So number 4 here is a key piece in this equation of understanding Vatican I and Pastor Aeternus, right? This means that when the Roman Curia selects a pope, and they alone can select the pope, no one else has the right to deny it, to reject it, because there is an element, as David has pointed out in his video, there is an element of reception theory in Roman Catholicism itself, right? So Orthodox will say, we know true councils in that over time the church eventually comes to realize and recognize which are true and which are false councils. And of course, Roman Catholics jump on this and they say, that's incoherent because you have reception theory. That's incoherent. Oh, but actually you have reception theory too, because whoever the Roman Curia and then by extension the rest of the world recognize as the Pope are in fact the actual successors to Peter, the real popes in this view, in this system. And that clearly is the Vatican I mindset, right? Roman pontiffs realized this unity of the church, supposedly, that is the actual living magisterium, right? This is something that the Sedevacantists cancel out in order to get to their invisible church heresy. I realize that Sedevacantists don't affirm the invisible church heresy, but we're saying that their position is identical in essence to the invisible church heresy because they are not actually in union with any continuing episcopate in union with Rome. They are in fact in union with a invisible chair of Peter that is essentially kind of ecclesiastical Nestorianism. There's the Pope, and then there's the ethereal Pope that they're in union with, who is vacant. So in other words, it's a bunch of documents that they're in union with and not an actual living successor. But Vatican I is very clear that the living successors, and it says that multiple times, 3 times, that until the end of time, the papacy and its living successors will continue in its same essential fundamental constitution, because if it were to lose successors, if it were to lose episcopacy, if it were to lose jurisdiction, all of which, again, go and function together in union with the Pope of Rome, if it were to lose those things, then the promise to the See of Peter is not true. And thus the visible unity of the church is no longer perpetual, point 6, if any of these things are lost. Unity with the Holy See identifies the hierarchy and the faithful. So essentially you can see then that the Sedevacantist thesis quite literally starts to break down. I mean, once we get 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7, these points literally break the whole system down, and it falls apart. And so ultimately Sedevacantism, which is a noble attempt amongst the trads, we toast you for your noble attempt to try to rescue the infallibility, indefectibility, and inerrancy of the papal office. Yet it completely denies Vatican I, the promises of Vatican I, which again 3 times state that the church, the papacy, its successors, its fundamental essential aspects that we just listed there will continue until the end of time, right? Not until the final apostasy where there's 100 years of no church, no Roman bishop, no, until the end of time. So the only way that would work is if there were still popes, and this is where quote conclavists are more consistent than the Sedevacantists. Because the conclavists actually understand this point, that the church has to continue with its Petrine office until the end of the world. It can't disappear and go away without denying Vatican I. It's that simple. You can't maintain the trad position as a Sedevacantist and believe in Vatican I. It's that simple. Now, the rest of that essay then moves on to discuss whether or not, in fact, the Vatican II papacy has defected according to the doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church. And in fact, we see that it has. In fact, just this week, what was the scandal of the week from Frank? Every week there's a great new scandal, which makes Frank, of course, the greatest apologist for orthodoxy. 4 days ago, this is all over. It's also in the trad sites too, by the way. So we'll go to Life Site here, the trad-minded Catholic site, pro-life site. And they have done a great job, by the way, just dissecting Frank almost on a daily basis. Of course, this doesn't seem to occur to them that maybe the Roman system itself is problematic. Pope Francis tells the teens that they are not disciples of Jesus if they try to convert non-believers. And we see the cope, the cope never ends. Oh, he didn't really say that. Excuse me. He always says this stuff. This goes back to John Paul II. The Vatican II papacy has been saying this stuff at least since John Paul II. You could probably find Paul VI saying similar stuff. In fact, I recall there's some quote, I think, from Paul VI along these lines where he says something like, oh, it's time to stop trying to convert, these other religions. And then they'll play these word games about, it says don't proselytize. It doesn't say don't convert them, as if that doesn't mean the same thing. Of course it does. And anybody who's studied ecumenism knows that the denial is equivalent, right? The denial of proselytization is equivalent to the denial of making converts. And that's because the same people who make these arguments are the same ecumenists. This is straight out of ecumenism. So again, what are we seeing here? Just another weekly instance, right? 3 weeks ago, it was Pachamama, right? Pachamama, and now it's don't convert people. Well, this is obviously contrary to the last 2,000 years of Christianity. And what did we see in the essay? The essay is that making it clear, actually, in my essay, I made it very clear, multiple places in Denzinger Roman Dogma, you cannot reject the normative teaching of the papacy. It actually condemns the view that I, as a Catholic theologian, I only will adhere to the authoritative teachings of the papacy, quote unquote. I will only adhere to extraordinary dogma. That's a condemned proposition. Almost every trad rehashes this like a mantra. Well, we only have to believe the last 4 extraordinarily defined dogmas. We don't actually have to believe everything that the Pope teaches. Oh, yes, you do. It's called ordinary magisterium. If it's universal, it's authoritative. And even if it's not universal, you still have to submit to it. Right? And again, so where is this? Denzinger. Denzinger 1722. The proposition, the obligation by which Catholic teachers and writers are absolutely bound is restricted by the matters that are only proposed by infallible judgment of the magisterium to be believed as dogmas. Condemned. The proposition that I only have to believe what is infallible dogma is a condemned proposition. That's not true. And obviously it's not true because it would be stupid in that system. Denzinger 1683 says the exact same thing. Faith and obedience are only bound to the dogmas expressly defined by the church. False, considered false. Denzinger 1698 says the same thing. It says that I only have to assent to the doctrines that are infallible in faith and morals, and I don't have to submit to the decrees and judgments of the Apostolic See. That is condemned as heretical. You do have to submit to the judgments and disciplines and decrees of the Roman See. Otherwise, you could just reject all the Pope's excommunications, and the whole thing falls down. It makes no sense. What authority would there be for the Apostolic See, quote unquote, to have the prerogatives of Vatican I and Pastor Aeternus if everybody could reject his excommunications like the stupid SSPX do? It would be pointless. The whole system breaks down. So, of course, you can't reject the universal ordinary magisterium, nor the ordinary magisterium, nor the disciplinary decisions of the Roman See and the Roman Curia and its congregations. In fact, it even says you have to believe the decisions of the Holy Office, the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, when they're signed off on by the Pope. You don't have a right to reject anything. There's no freedom of rights to reject anything out of the Apostolic See. That's why it's called the Apostolic See. That's why the Roman Catholic system is supposed to be very simple. It's very clear, right? You follow what the Pope says. And it doesn't matter how many times you try to break down all the criteria of, well, here he's writing as a private theologian and there. That's true. He could be writing as a private theologian, but you're still supposed to submit with reverence and with docility. The typical Catholic word in moral theology is with docility. Now we'll get the litany of the trads who will come forth. Oh, we don't have to accept XYZ, XYZ. Why? Because they don't want to accept Francis. But guess what? All the stuff Francis is doing, Paul VI did it. John the 23rd did it. John 23rd had giant ecumenical gatherings with communists at the Vatican. Paul VI did it. John Paul II took it to the next layer with Assisi I and Assisi II. Ratzinger did all the same stuff. He had his own Assisi type stuff going on. Ratzinger's books are completely modernist. He says all kinds of crazy modernist things. I've read 7 of his books. So this is just nonsense. Like if Hans Küng is disciplined for teaching modernism in his normative theological books, supposedly, like any trad would tell you this, right? And then if Ratzinger turns around and says all the same types of modernist stuff, then he's under the same modernist teaching and influence and worldview. And it doesn't matter what classification, strictly speaking, his writings are under. It doesn't matter if he's writing as a private theologian or if he's writing as a public theologian, because if something's heretical, it's heretical. But the trads have this giant, elaborate mental gymnastics system algorithm where you can plug in and stick in anything to tweak the whole thing to make it line up. And in everybody else's face in the entire world, everybody can look and see that he's blessing Pachamama and he's not Orthodox. And he's telling people not to make converts. Well, how is the infallible guide under the charism of Peter supposed to be telling us not to make converts? So the point is that both the Novus Ordo are correct in that the Sedevacantists and the traditionalists reject the power and authority and prerogatives of the See of Rome, and the Sedevacantists and the traditionalists are correct that the past several popes are completely heterodox. Obviously, the whole world can see it. And then when we see the manifestations of all the pedo stuff, which is rampant, it's a confirmation to most people that you will know them by their fruits, and that that's not the true church, right? And so we're not actually doing rocket science here. You can get bogged down in all this minutia of theology. Yeah, sure you can. And that's why I write these long essays citing everything from the Synodicon of Orthodoxy to the, ad sonarum gentum, apostolica veda vacanta sedis, pastor aeternus, Denzinger, right? So I'm citing all this stuff just to prove the trads are incorrect, because I was a trad. I know what it's like to think as a trad. And it's not that difficult, right? Once we see that the Roman system is basically built on those points from Vatican I, if you just read Vatican I, it's pretty straightforward. And it just lays out very basic principles that you don't have the right as a Roman Catholic to reject the teaching of the Pope, the teaching of the papacy. And yes, the Pope can write as a private theologian and give his opinions, but his normative teaching, and by the way, all the post-Vatican II popes have affirmed the authority and dogmatic status of Vatican II. In fact, Francis just said it 2 years ago. He put out multiple Vatican documents. We've shown it multiple times on here, where he says that Vatican II is absolutely a magisterial document. You have to accept the liturgical forms of Vatican II reforms, and they are dogmatic. And by the way, the trads are dishonest when it comes to that, because all you have to do to understand the basis of the Vatican II liturgical reforms is look up the history of the liturgical reform movement. Who pioneered the liturgical reform movement? A bunch of liberals and Freemasons? No. The popes of the 20th century back to Pius X. It's called the liturgical movement. And trads don't tell you this because they don't know what they're talking about. Some of them will know about this, and they'll admit it, and they'll be like, yeah, well, there was liberals. Just look up liturgical movement. It's called the liturgical movement. It's a 19th century movement, and it was, in a way, ecumenical. It went through all the churches, everything from Church of England to all these other goofy Lutheran, all this kind of stuff, right? And I remember I was kind of shocked when I found out that Pius X is who began the reforms. Did you know that? Now, he didn't reform the Mass itself, but go look up the liturgical reforms of Pius XII, right? The last so-called trad pope, right? When Pius XII began his liturgical reforms as part of the liturgical movement, he was continuing a process initiated by Pius X. And you say, oh, you're citing Wikipedia. Yeah, so what? Because it's well known. It doesn't matter if I'm citing Wikipedia if this is a fact that's true and well known. But apparently it's not very well known amongst the trads because they don't actually know the history of liturgy. They just assume that the whole history of liturgy is, a battle about the preservation of the Latin Mass or some nonsense, right? And, by the way, what was the other great quote from Francis today or yesterday is that he's about ready to ban the Latin Mass everywhere. Yes, literally. Francis is ready to ban the Latin Mass. So, all these, like, your Pope doesn't even want you doing your Mass. How is he your guide? Pope Francis rumblings. This was what rumblings of today. Rumblings. Pope Francis contemplates banning the Latin Mass. All right. Anyway, enough of this boring nonsense. We are going to move in the next couple weeks to getting ready for the next big debate with a Muslim scholar. We are going to take it to the next level. We debated Paul Williams, some months ago. That was a entertaining debate, if you remember the Paul Williams debate. But now we've got a guy, I don't know this guy personally. We've had some chats on Discord and whatnot. So we're going to be moving on to, we asked Taylor Marshall to debate. He declined. Everybody we asked to debate declines, okay? By the way, I think Sticks said he's willing to do a debate. So we've had a couple debates with Sticks in the past, some friendly exchanges with Sticks, and I think we're going to have perhaps a debate. We'll see what happens in the near future. Don't know when with Sticks, but he did say he enjoys the chats we've had, and he would be up for debate. So I don't know what topic we'll pick for Sticks. We debated human rights topics in the past with Sticks. We'll put it that way. The A word with Sticks in the past, and we debated. We had a discussion on Neoplatonism and Hermeticism with Sticks. That was the other topic. That's right. So now we have a Muslim scholar we're going to be debating, not Paul. His name is Ijaz, and I think he's part of the Dawa group. So I'm sure Bob the Builder and those guys are familiar with Ijaz. I have not seen Ijaz. I don't know if I guess he has debates, but I'm told that Ijaz really focuses on textual issues. And so when we were setting up this debate, I said, well, I am not opposed to discussing textual issues, but typically my approach is apologetic and philosophic. So I'm not usually debating, textual traditions. And he agreed to this. He agreed to have a debate with me on the topic of the unity of God and the multiplicity of God, the one and the many in the Trinity versus the unity or whatever, Tawheed. And we will be debating that in the next couple weeks. No, wait, second or third week of January with Ijaz. Yeah, I don't know his approach, but basically, so I took college classes that dealt with Islam, but I'm not a scholar on Islam. As we know from the Paul Williams debate, we were really just debating kind of his misunderstandings of Christianity. So in this debate, it's going to be a little bit different because we're going to be shifting and discussing the issue of one and many. How can we really speak cataphatically or even apophatically at all about God? How can we have divine names? Which, of course, for us, as you guys know, comes down to the essence-centered distinction, right? The Orthodox Christian religion is the only religion in the world that has the essence-centered distinction. The other religions do not. And thus, all the other world religions are premised on absolute divine simplicity in some form or fashion. We won't just be debating absolute divine simplicity. I'm sure other topics will come into play. But it's going to be interesting to see the route that Ijaz takes. So that'll be a fun debate. I think it'll be on their channel. I think that's what we agreed to. Don't know who the moderator is going to be. We'll have to probably find. They said, "Do you want a Jewish guy to be a moderator?" Which was pretty funny. I don't know. I don't know who we're going to have as moderator, but one and many in God. That will be interesting. There was some other note I wanted to tell you guys before we got into Genesis. I don't remember what it is, but I think the growth appears, well, we seem to be out of our little cage. We were kind of caged for the last month on YouTube due to all the algorithm changes, and now the growth is kind of coming back. We're getting back to where we're getting the 100 or so a week that we were getting 100 or more new subscribers a week, and that was getting pretty regular. It was growing pretty well. And then when all those changes and all the stuff of the last month happened, everybody's stuff kind of shifted. So I may have to start also talking about the news headlines, right? This seems to work. I'm not opposed to this. We did this many years ago, when we were doing Jay's analysis 3, 4, 5 years ago, we talked about geopolitics a lot. We talked about headline type stuff pretty frequently. So I may have to add that into the rotation because the algorithm just won't promote the movie reviews. Like I do these movie reviews, I put a lot of time into them, studying, researching, taking notes, and they only get, the percentile of like to dislike is always like 95, 97, 98% on the movie reviews. And then they get to 5,000 and they freeze. Like my film analysis video, like they just get to 5,000, then they're done. As if, nobody likes, and the number 5,000 doesn't even match up to the ratios of likes to dislikes. Because if a video has 700 likes, 600 likes to 4 dislikes to 5, 10 dislikes, normally speaking, 700 to 1,000 likes on a video, that's like 20, 30,000 views typically. So I'm supposed to think that a video that gets 4,900 views and has 600-700 likes, really, I don't know. Something seems fishy about this. I don't think that these numbers are accurate. And, we keep expanding and yet our numbers stay frozen. It's just something's weird. So what we're going to do is, I think, maybe try to incorporate more of the news videos, because I guess that the only thing the algorithm's going to promote is like talking about news. I guess if it works for Sticks and Tim Pool, I don't know. We'll try it out maybe. But all right, let's get to the topic of Abraham. I'm drinking big giant gallons of coffee here, so I'm gonna have to take a masculine whiz break. I'm not gonna go sit down on the toilet. I don't sit down to pee. I'm actually going to stand up. I had a urinal placed in my house, in my man cave. My whole house is a man cave, and it has open urinals, actually. So I'm going to be standing up at the urinal, not sitting down at the toilet. There are no toilets in my house. It's all urinals in my new house that I live in, my Boomer McMansion. It's not a McMansion. It's a normie middle-class house. And I'll be right back. So enjoy this beautiful Dyer wave from Amid the Ruins 1453, and then we'll get into Genesis. If you remember, it is a channel, Amid the Ruins 1453. Go subscribe to him. He's a great musician. He's done some sweet riffs, some sweet solos. Some guy said the other day that he could not take me seriously for saying that something is sweet. You're sweet, and not in a cool way. All right, welcome. Thank you. Glad to see you all here. We got a room of almost 200 nerds. I'm sure the nerds will pile in. Maybe we can get up to about 300 tonight. We'll see. It's your boy, Jay, in the house. Your boy. Can't see me. All right. Hush up that Dyer wave. Hush up. Hush up. Hush you, as Steve Brule says. All right. Are you sitting down? Are you making brown? Hush up. So in Genesis 11, this is where we left off last time. We were discussing the genealogies, the genealogy of Shem, post-Tower of Babel. And if you were a subscriber, you got to hear the second part of the third lecture. So in Genesis 12, we moved to the Abrahamic covenant. The Abrahamic covenant is the next in the succession of the covenants that are one of the key unifying factors of Scripture. The covenants, in fact, unify the Old and the New Testament, and as we mentioned, they are expansive. Right? It begins with a household, or we should say it begins with a family of Adam and Eve. The covenant with Adam and Eve, Adam breaks that covenant. God then begins the process of redemption and restoring mankind to fellowship and unity and worship of Him through successive covenants. They are the key to the unifying of the Scriptures. The next covenant, of course, as we saw, was the Noahic covenant, right? This is where the term Noahide laws comes from. Now, in Orthodox Christianity, we don't affirm the Noahide laws, right? This is a thing that's being promoted now. Rather, if you look at Acts 15, as we'll see, so we're progressing through the Scriptures chronologically, so it'll be a long time before we get to Acts and the book of Romans. But if you recall, the Acts 15 actually does appeal to the covenant of Noah when it's looking for the elements that will be necessary for Gentiles to come into the covenant. So we have one covenant that stretches from Adam to Noah to Abraham, which is where we are today, and then to Moses, and then to David, and then to Jesus. Okay, so these successive covenants build on one another and they expand, right? So from the family to the household with Noah, 8 people, to the tribe with Abraham, to the nation with Moses, and then with David, you get the kingly aspect of the covenant, and then the covenant goes global with Jesus, who fulfills and brings this global kingdom. All of what we're going to see is being prophesied and predicted from all of these Old Testament texts to be fulfilled in the New. So it's really absurd and impossible to understand the New Testament, to understand the Bible really, if you don't understand the Old Testament, if you don't understand what's in Genesis and Leviticus and Numbers and all of the Torah, all this stuff, the prophets. None of it's going to make sense because in the New Testament, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of citations of the Old Testament. So how are you going to understand the New Testament when you don't understand all these Old Testament citations? And the fact that the New Testament constantly cites the Old Testament shows, number one, that the Old Testament is real historical information. If you accept this religion, if you believe it, you have to believe that. Jesus constantly cites the Old Testament. Constantly. He constantly does apologetics through citing the Old Testament. Constantly refers to Genesis. Constantly refers to the Psalms. Constantly refers to Adam and Eve, Hagar, Sarah, these people as historical people, right? The New Testament and Jesus, right? So when we come to this next covenant, this is a huge step forward. As we saw, the preservation of the church of this time, of God's people at this time, is a visible group which is consisting of primarily nomadic families. And at this point, the irony here is that God is going to call out of a Gentile group, a pagan group in Ur of Chaldee, a Chaldean, a guy named Abram. And Abram takes a wife named Sarai, and they're amongst the Chaldeans. And Abram's dad is a idol maker. That's his profession. Right? Terah was an idol maker. So what we see in this is the grace of God, first of all. God didn't have to choose Abraham because he was a good guy. God gracefully chose Abraham to fulfill God's purposes. So Abraham didn't merit this. And Paul is going to consistently ground his theology of grace in his apologetic against Jews and his apologetic for Gentiles in the character of Abraham, because Abraham was a Gentile. That's what's so amazing here, is that not only does the Noahic covenant function as a window by which we can see the early church figuring out the best means to bring Gentiles into the covenant, because if God accepted Noah as righteous, then that is a way to be righteous with God, right? Even before Mosaic law is administrated and instituted, right? So if God accepted Noah as righteous, as a Gentile, then God will accept other Gentiles. And so the church determines that we need not lay any more burden beyond what Noah had, right? And this is in Acts 15 when you see the Jerusalem council makes their decision on what's binding for Gentiles to come into the covenant. They make that decision looking back to covenants like the covenant with Noah. Paul, for his apologetic purposes, is going to, again, utilize Abraham as the father of Jew and Gentile. And it's not just because Abraham believed in God, right? Oh, it's not about works. It's just this mental notion of faith. This is a Protestant misconception. And I know all about this because I spent years as a Protestant, as a Calvinist, and I went to Protestant seminary. So we're going to see that Abraham, the person, the patriarch Abraham, actually refutes the Roman Catholic system, and he refutes the Calvinist system, and he refutes the Judaic Talmudic system. Abraham is the forefather of those who have faith in Christ, as we'll see, but that faith is a living faith. And we're actually going to see that one of the key tenets of many of the Reformed Calvinist expositors, they will believe in this idea of a covenant of grace, you'll hear them say. There's this covenant of works over here, and there's this covenant of grace over here, and there's these two covenants who throughout history dialectically kind of battling one another. And so Moses, that's a covenant of works, and then Abraham is a covenant of grace. This is a false dialectic because every covenant actually has grace and it has sanctions. All of them, even the totally gracious ones. There are expectations. There are covenant obligations, and if you don't fulfill the covenant obligations, curses will come upon you. And we're going to see this, that with Abraham, it's not all in Genesis 12. It's not all in Genesis 15. It's not all in Genesis 17, and it's not all in Genesis 22. Those are the key chapters for the covenant promises to Abraham. In fact, at every stage, Abraham not only has obligations, but he also is given grace by God. And that grace from God actually helps and empowers Abraham to fulfill the covenant obligations. And this is, of course, the response that we have to the traditions like Protestantism, like Calvinism, that the grace of God is not something that is purely nominal, that's purely verbal, that's purely notional. The grace of God is actually a living power. It is the uncreated power of God himself in us. And so if God speaks something, it is efficacious, right? Isaiah says that God speaks and it comes to pass, right? When God speaks, the world comes to be. When God speaks the name that you are righteous, you don't remain filthy rags and then have a covering of righteousness, but secretly you're filthy rags. No, you're actually changed. And then that change is something that is declarative at the point for us of baptism, ultimately. But it's also progressive. And so, in other words, whether it's justification or whether it's sanctification or whether it's theosis, transfiguration, all of those are terms that are describing the same event, which is also a process. There's no sinner's prayer and then everything is do whatever you want after that. There is the beginning stage, but you also have to persevere. And so Augustine, for example, wrote a famous treatise about the perseverance of the saints, which he said was a gift. And I don't think Orthodoxy would necessarily have a problem saying that persevering is a gift, but we simply deny that the will of man ever goes away or that you ever lose your natural will. So one of the key arguments against Sola Fidei of the Protestants is actually going to be Abraham. Yes, you heard me right. Abraham, the supposed keystone of Protestant Sola Fidei, is actually one of the strongest arguments against Sola Fidei. And although before I had read any Catholic apologists back when I was a Calvinist, and I didn't know about Orthodoxy, but I was like, oh, okay, well maybe it's a battle between the Catholics and the Protestants. I was under the impression that Abraham is the keystone, and there's no way around. And then I realized, wait a minute, there's a certain citation of Paul. Let's look at it. And when Paul is proving his point in Romans, there's a problem. Because according to my Protestant Calvinist presuppositions, in Genesis 4, right, we read Paul describing the case of Abraham, And he says in verse 22, and therefore it was accounted to him for righteousness. Now, I noticed one day when I was reading that, wait a minute. That's a citation from Genesis 15. But the problem is that Abraham is called in Genesis 12. Abraham's not called in Genesis 15 for the first time. He's called in Genesis 12, and every Calvinist, everybody knows this. But Paul intentionally does not cite Genesis 12. He cites Genesis 15. Many events transpire between Genesis 12 and Genesis 15. But why is Paul screwing up and not citing Genesis? Because if Paul is right, if the declaration of the imputation of righteousness occurs at the point of, quote, saving faith being exercised mentally, right, at the point of regeneration or whatever, then Paul should not have cited Genesis 15, because Genesis 15 is not in the Protestant scheme when Abraham would have been justified. And I remember taking that question to Protestants, and I remember getting a litany of mental gymnastics answers. And that was when I started to have doubts about Sola Fidei. And then I went and I read all of Augustine's works against the Donatists. And then I read all of Augustine's works against the Pelagians. And not only did I realize that these same arguments are found in Augustine, I realized that Augustine doesn't teach Sola Fidei at all. In fact, he believes that grace inspires the merits that God accepts. That's not at all Calvinism and Protestantism. So we were being dishonest as Calvinists, trying to cite Augustine as some proto-Calvinist forefather that we loved and adhered to and admired. If he doesn't teach Sola Fidei, he's a heretic. It's not honest. It's dishonest. And if he believes in all those doctrines like reverencing Mary, relics, which he mentions all throughout the end of City of God, Mass, divine liturgy, the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, if he believes all the baptismal regeneration, Augustine believes all these things. We as Calvinists say all these things are heretical. Well, this just doesn't work. This guy is not Orthodox, right? Because the Calvinist makes the argument that in Galatians, when Paul says, if any man preaches another gospel, let him be anathema, that has to apply to people after Paul who teach the Protestant conception of works-based salvation. And that would include all of the church fathers, all of them. Well, now we begin to see how this stupid system is ridiculous and breaks down. And what is the problem here? The problem is that the Protestant approach to theology has the wrong Ordo theologia. It has the wrong order of theology. It approaches theology through soteriology first and its presuppositions about soteriology, and then it tries to do things like Christology and triadology. Orthodoxy is completely different because Orthodoxy follows the method and approach of the early church, which in God's providence did not define the soteriological dogmas first. They defined triadology and Christology first, because triadology and Christology will be the conditioner for how we understand anthropology. And our doctrine of anthropology cannot contradict our Christology. That's how and why we can't accept any of the Protestant errors, because they're all based on the same absolute divine simplicity mistake that Roman Catholicism is based on. Now, they have different conclusions as the Roman Catholics, but they have the same mistaken starting point, because the Reformers never questioned absolute divine simplicity and the filioque, and they never taught the essence energy distinction either. So they have all the same presuppositions, just different conclusions of the Roman Catholics. But again, the point here is that in Romans 4, Paul does not quote Genesis 12. And that's when he should have quoted Genesis 12, because that's when Abraham should have been seen in the Calvinist scheme as justified, not Genesis 15. You don't do years of works and then get declared righteous later. That's completely contrary to the Calvinist Protestant scheme. So Abraham is called out of the land of Ur of Chaldees, and God decides that there will be a covenant made with Abraham. And this covenant, by the way, is not just in chapter 12. It's a successive thing that happens at different points in the life of Abraham. And so what we start to notice, and we'll see in 22, This is another stupid mistake the Protestants make and the Calvinists make. There's absolutely conditions for Abraham. I don't know where they get this idea that the covenant with Abraham is unconditional. There are conditions. Now, Paul does at times contrast Moses with Abraham, but he's doing that for an apologetic reason. He's not trying to say that there's this vast dichotomy between Moses and Abraham, as if it wasn't the same covenant structure and the same God leading people in, again, successive covenants to the new covenant. But the new covenant, right? Jesus says, if you love me, keep my commandments. There's stipulations. It's conditional. You have to keep these commands to be saved. And every church father at Nicaea believed and taught this. None of them taught sola fide. None of them. In fact, Protestant scholars like Alistair McGrath have written entire giant books. Justitia Dei by Alistair McGrath, famous book. Justitia Dei, the Oxford scholar, proves that nobody taught sola fide. Nobody taught Luther's doctrine prior to Luther. Not in the way that Luther and the Reformers said was necessary to be saved. And so therefore you have a new doctrine that's supposedly the foundation stone of the true church and the true religion, which is not found for the first 1,500 years of Christianity. Now, where was the church? Oh, it was in the blackout phase. Oh, it was in a Babylonian captivity. Oh, it was stuck in mired in or you guys are wrong. And you just happen to have all these other heresies, Christological heresies. Calvinists are all Nestorian. You just happen to have all those. Oh, but you actually, but you have the gospel right? No. Actually, it's all wrong. You've got it all wrong because you have the wrong starting point, the wrong presuppositions, because you haven't actually questioned absolute divine simplicity, because absolute divine simplicity conditions all the rest of Calvinist theology, Lutheran theology, Anglican theology, Roman Catholic. It doesn't matter because it's all Augustinian. Orthodox theology does not adhere to the same primacy of place for Augustine as the other Western religions do. We give him a place, we give him honor, but he's not the Pope of theology for us. Just like Aquinas, Augustine and Aquinas are the popes of theology for Roman Catholicism and all the West, right? Even if you're now the Protestants, even the Protestant scholars and the Calvinists are latching onto Aquinas, which is absurd, but they are. So in Genesis 12, we read, God, the Lord, said to Abram, get out of your country and out of your kindred and from your father's house to a land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. And I will bless those that bless you, and I will curse those that curse you. And in you, all the tribes of the earth will be blessed. Now, that's a conditional, right? God is asking him to do something. Abraham could have chosen not to do it, right? But no, God obviously in his foreknowledge knew he would do it, but God is asking him, saying, do this thing. And Abraham obeys. So Abraham leaves, and the covenant promised here is that he will become a nation. He will be given the promised land. So here we have the beginning of the promise to give to Abraham and his descendants Canaan's land, what will become Palestine, Jerusalem. And that those who go after this church, this people group, they will be cursed, and those that bless them will be blessed. So here we have the blessing and cursing aspect of the covenant. Remember, God, as the sovereign king, establishes the covenant. The covenant includes stipulations, and it includes sanctions. These are features that are present in all the covenants. Remember, we were told later in the Minor Prophets that there was a covenant with Adam, right? The text in Genesis itself does not literally say that there's a covenant with Adam, but we're later told by the Minor Prophets that God had a covenant with Adam. So we know that it was a covenant. And Adam was told to do certain things, right? Till the garden, be fruitful, multiply, don't eat the tree. And sanctions are given. If you do, X, Y, Z will happen. Curses. Blessings and cursings. In the same way, Abraham is told, do this. The expectation is that you will obey. And if you do, you will get XYZ blessings. If you don't, curses come. And by the way, if you do obey, I'll curse your enemies. I will fight for you. Now, yes, the literal fulfillment of this relates to the actual place in Palestine, Israel. The real place. It is a historical, real thing here going on, we believe. But there's also the beginning of a messianic prophecy. Now, we've seen types, right? We saw Adam as a type of Christ. We saw Mary as a type of Eve. We saw the seed of the woman, right, crushing the head of the serpent, the proto-evangelium in Genesis. We've seen Noah as a type of Christ. Here we have Abraham becoming also a type of Christ. And the Abrahamic covenant will relate to the covenant with Christ, the new covenant. Each one of these covenants is a successive broadening picture. A more and more is being revealed and moved out of the way to see the full picture, the stained glass window, you could say, or whatever, of God's full revelation, right? But Abraham, again, at this time is a family. He's called by God to convert out of paganism. He converts. And here he will, he is a descendant of Shem, by the way. I don't want to be unclear here. But he's a pagan, okay? His family's pagan, but he's converting. So he experiences a miraculous appearance. Eventually, we'll see very clearly that it is a theophany. The Lord is appearing to him. So how does God appear? Well, an absolutely simple essence can't appear within time and space, but actually the essence energy distinction does allow for there to be theophanies. So we begin to see, again, the theophanic manifestations here, right? And that is an appearance of God. That's what a theophany is in Orthodox theology. So God appears to Abraham, and it said, we know that from verse 4. Abraham departed as the Lord said him to go. In verse 7, it says, the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your seed I will give this land, right? And so Abraham then builds an altar, and he pitched his tent at Bethel. Bethel, the word Bethel means house of God. Abraham's family at this time is the church. They are the house of God. They are the city of God, right? So even the names here in Genesis are significant to explain to us the meaning of the house of God. Ultimately, this is fulfilled in the church. The church is the house of God, the kingdom of God, the household of God, the vine, et cetera, et cetera. All these, the body, these are all analogies describing the same community, which is the church. But we have a beginning of the messianic prophecy here with the promise that through Abraham's seed, all of the nations, well, eventually it'll say nations, but here it says tribes. All the tribes of the earth are going to be blessed. Now, some people might say, this just means the tribes of the earth, as in the tribes of Israel, a prediction of the future of the tribes of Israel. Because sometimes in Scripture, tribes of the earth is a reference to Israel. Israel is called the earth. And the tribes of the earth are references to the 12 tribes. Could be both, but because actually we'll see that the 12 tribes will be a representation also for the new humanity. And in fact, when Jesus sends out the 70, this corresponds to the 70 of Genesis 10, the 70 nations, right? So he's sending out the 70 to evangelize. It's a foresignifying of the bringing in of the Gentile nations, all of whom descend from the original 70 nations of Genesis 10. So the messianic prophecy, again, is that I will make your name great. I will make you a blessing. In your seed and in you, he's saying, later he'll say in his seed, from him, in you, all the tribes of the earth will be blessed. Remember Apocalypse 4, right? When John sees into heaven, he sees out of every tribe, tongue, and nation and people group, people worshiping the Lord. That's fulfilling this promise to Abraham. Now, again, think back to how people would have thought at this time, right? I mean, Abraham and presumably perhaps some other people, that's all there was of the church. The church was a tiny household tribe of people at this time, right? So the rest of the world is pretty much mired in paganism. Now, there could have been some followers of God outside of this group that we don't know about, people like Melchizedek, Job, perhaps, we don't know. But for the most part, the world is mired in idolatry, right? Immediately after Babel, after Noah, after Babel, after Babel and then after Noah, right? No, I'm sorry. After Noah and then Babel, the world is still mired in idolatry. The nations are all worshiping gods, demons, etc., etc. And we have this promise that God will reverse this, right? God will, out of all of these pagan nations, all these nations are eventually going to turn back to God. What? That's crazy. This tiny little group of people, that could never happen, right? And so for the entirety of the Old Testament period, there's going to be all these prophecies that are part of the Messianic. Even the Jews admit they're part of the Messianic prophecies. They don't think Jesus fulfills it, but they do admit that all these are all Messianic prophecies. How in the world could all these pagan nations, the whole world, all bunch of pagans, how would they ever turn back to the true God? How would they ever worship the God of Abraham? That seems impossible. You're never going to convert all those pagans to the one true God. How? It's impossible. But with God, all things are possible. What does the angel say in Luke? Why are you doubting? Anything's possible with God. I was looking for that text in the Apocalypse. I think it's, it's Apocalypse 5, right? So remember, Genesis 12 says that out of all the tribes, and then we have in Apocalypse 5, verse 9, and this is when John sees the liturgy in heaven. Quite literally, the whole book of the Apocalypse is John witnessing a heavenly liturgy. That's why we do liturgy. The church is the Apocalypse liturgy on earth, right? The church's liturgy is the Apocalypse liturgy. People just, any phrase I say, there are people sitting there waiting for me to say something and just trip up on the littlest, and then they'll take it and just run with it and say that I said some crazy thing. It's just mental illness everywhere. He says in 5:9, and I look and I saw those in heaven, the prayers of the saints. By the way, listen to this. This is partly why we do liturgy. Now, when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, and each one of them had a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. So that's why the church still has incense, is because incense is part of the liturgy, and it's in the New Testament. It's not done away. We believe that the Apocalypse, what we see in the Apocalypse, is an image of the liturgy and worship of the church, not just in heaven, but also on earth. When you walk into the Orthodox Church, you're stepping into this right here, quite literally this. Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and you have redeemed us by God, to God by your blood, out of every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. And you have made us a kingdom of priests to our God, and we shall reign upon the earth. So the fulfillment of the Abrahamic promise is mentioned in the New Testament church, you see. Now, the goofy evangelicals, they read the Apocalypse. They think this has only to do with whatever crap John Hagee's talking about in the future. It's not. It's talking about the establishment of the church when Jesus ascended. When Jesus ascended and he sat at the right hand of the Father, look at how many times the New Testament cites Psalm 110. Every time the New Testament cites Psalm 110 about sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool, it's always about the immediate reign of Christ that begins in the church. The church is the kingdom of God on earth. The reign of Christ began when he set up the church, when he sends the Spirit at Pentecost in Acts 2. So the promise of to Abraham and Abram at this point, he's not yet given the new name, obviously, but the promise to Abram in Genesis 12, we believe, relates to the fulfillment of the coming of the Messiah. When the Messiah comes, because he's the descendant, you see. In the New Testament, in the Gospels, you have the genealogies, right? The genealogy from Adam, and you have the genealogy from Abraham, right? Matthew does his genealogy from Abraham because Matthew is written for a Jewish audience. And so the concern of the Jew would be, now wait a minute, the Messiah has to descend from Abraham, right? Hence why Matthew, at the beginning, this is the genealogy of Jesus, son of David, son of Abraham. So Matthew's gospel, written for a Jewish audience, is giving you the lineage to David, to Abraham, because those are the two most important figures in the history of Israel by whom we are told the Messiah will come as a descendant, you see. So what is seed here? What's the meaning of seed here? It's multiple. Is it literal or is it spiritual? It's both. Because during this period in the Old Testament, during this period of Genesis, it is literal in the sense that it's Abraham's biological descendants who will give birth to not just David, right? Because David is a partial fulfillment of this promise, right? David comes to reign in Israel, right? And he's sort of the pinnacle, you could say, of the power of Israel in a way, because he beats all of his enemies. You know, David has killed his 10,000, Saul his 1,000. And then you have the time of peace with his son Solomon, right? So Solomon reigns during a time of peace. But what I'm saying is that David is a partial fulfillment in the sense of the literal fulfillment. And then the spiritual fulfillment comes in Christ, who's also literal, right? We're not splitting these up either or, like spirit is against literal. That's not what we're saying. Because at this time, we believe Abraham is not just a biological progenitor. Like, he doesn't just create the biological progeny that will give birth to the Messiah. He's also, at this time, the spiritual church. So the church at this time is both biological and spiritual. Now, when we get to the Messiah, it's going to not be so much concerned with biology anymore. It's going to transfer to it being primarily an emphasis on the spiritual. We're not Gnostics, so we don't remove all the biological significance. That would be Gnostic. Rather, the emphasis shifts, and it becomes a focus on the spiritual, and that's how it's possible for Gentiles to be brought into this covenant and to fulfill all of these promises, you see. So, understanding the seed here is going to be made clear by Paul in Galatians and Romans, right? Primarily, Romans and Galatians are the two places where Paul specifically exposits the story of Abraham extensively. And what he says is that the seed here is not just his progeny, because many of Abraham's descendants will be wicked. And we know God doesn't accept the wicked, right? So who's the seed? Well, for a long time period here, it's going to be spiritual. And even in the Old Testament period, it's not just biological, because there were converts to the true God then. Noah was not a descendant of Abraham, and yet God accepted Noah, right? And for example, during the Exodus, it says that many of the Egyptians joined themselves to the Israelites. They became believers. Later in Genesis, we will see instances of converts to the true God who will join themselves to the Israelites. So even in the Old Testament period, there are righteous people. Rahab the harlot, right? People who convert and worship the true God even in this time period. I gotta plug this computer in before it dies. Hold on. Okay. So even in the Old Testament period, it wasn't purely a biological situation. The church was, you could say, only amongst the Israelites and was primarily biological, but there were always converts, even back then. And that shows that it wasn't always a strictly biological thing. So we know that Abraham takes Sarai for his wife, and Lot his brother's son and all their possessions, and they moved that they acquired in Haran, and they departed for the land of Canaan. So here we have the exiting motif. The Exodus motif is a motif that will come up consistently to leave the land of idolatry and paganism and move to righteousness. Now, ultimately, it's not so much about spatial location, although it could be. Maybe if you live in a particularly degenerate region, you need to move away. I don't know, but really, here it is spatially located, and then it's a movement to the promised land. But in Romans 4, when Paul interprets this, he says that God is not ultimately concerned with a patch of land. God is ultimately concerned with the world. Abraham and his descendants taking the promised land is a type of the church conquering the world with the gospel. I'm not talking about conquering the world with an Orthodox emperor who smashes everybody. People take that out of context. The preaching of the gospel, according to the apocalypse, is the sword that proceeds from his mouth, right? Ruling with a rod of iron is said in the apocalypse to be when Christ ascended. It's ruling through his church. The church converting the nations is the fulfillment of the Israelites taking the promised land. It's a type. Bringing the world into the kingdom of God, which is the church, the Orthodox church. So it's not spiritual versus physical, physical versus spiritual. That's Gnostic. We don't believe that. That's a feature of Protestant heretics and weird medieval Roman Catholics smacking themselves with cat o' nine tails. We don't do mortification, right? That's not biblical. It's not Orthodox. In fact, St. Gregory of Palamas makes fun of Barlaam for mortification. The Lord appeared to Abraham. So here's a theophany. How can God appear to a man? Well, because of the essence synergy distinction. This is a cornerstone of Orthodox theology. That's how. And by the way, St. Maximus Confessor says in the chapters on theology that the Old Testament saints possessed theosis. So the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your seed I will give this land, the promised land. And Abraham built an altar. So this is a liturgical battle here. Right? So even for Abraham, the warfare ultimately isn't political. Abraham will go into battle. That will be useful and necessary for him at certain periods. But and yes, Israel will conquer the promised land through battle. But the purpose, both here when Abraham exoduses Ur of Chaldees and when the Israelites exodus Egypt, is for liturgical worship in both cases, right? So Abraham is told to leave. He's told to exit, to go through an exodus motif of leaving Ur of Chaldees. The Jews in Egypt will be called out through Moses, go through the exodus motif to leave. In the New Testament, Paul interprets this as we individuals, there's an individual application to exit, go through an exodus of your life of sin and depravity and into living according to Christ's law. And there's also an application for the church as a whole, that the church has to exit the world and move into battle. You're called to battle, to warfare. What does Paul say our battle is? Is it with swords and knives? No. Although there may be times when there is self-defense that's necessary, where you are called to defend other people. Sure. Again, don't do the Gnostic dialectic of either or. You have to have wisdom to know when to apply what, right? But primarily the battle is spiritual in the sense of, what does Paul say? Pulling down the strongholds of Satan, right? The strongholds of this world, by which he means vain philosophy, lies, heresies, right? Principalities and powers that rule in spiritual places. What's he talking about? He's talking about fallen angelic entities. Demons, that's what he's talking about. That's the ultimate battle that we're fighting here, because the demons have control, and not full control. They're not possessing every single person, obviously, but people that are not in Christ in some way, form, or fashion, even if they're just serving themselves, they're icons of the devil. In a sense, spiritually speaking, right? They still retain their humanity. I'm not saying they're not humans. I'm not dehumanizing them. They still have natures that are made that are made in the image of God, right? They're still people made in the image of God. Their nature is still good, but spiritually speaking, they are under the dominion of the evil one. And so that's why the theology that's being explained here is not just a physical battle in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, the emphasis was on the physical, but the spiritual was still present because they possessed theosis. And in the New Testament, the emphasis shifts. Not an either or. We're not Gnostics. We're not Marcionites, right? Where the emphasis is on the spiritual, but we still have a duty to the civil state. Romans 13, the civil state is still a minister of God, right? None of this pacifist heresy, this pacifist nonsense, none of that is in the New Testament. It's not biblical at all. It's all out of Marcionism, right? We are adamant opponents of Marcionism here because it is one of the chief heresies of our day. What is Marcionism? Marcion was the early church heretic who taught that the Old Testament was a mean God and the New Testament was a hippie Jesus God, right? Totally foreign to Scripture. Nothing like that. There's love preached throughout the Old Testament, even in Leviticus. Leviticus says you have to love your enemies. And there's justice and the death penalty taught in the New Testament. So, total nonsense. So, the warfare I'm trying to get at is not just like goofy charismatics rolling around and barking on the floor like idiots. That's not the spiritual warfare that we're talking about. We're talking about spiritual warfare being conducted through the liturgical rites of the church. Now, it's not magic. You could do your rituals all day long, but if your heart's not right, it doesn't matter. So again, it's not either or, it's both and, right? But what I'm saying is that Abraham does this and he obeys so that he can set up an altar. What does he put first? Does he set up a civil state? Does he set up a militia? No, he sets up an altar because Abraham at this point is the church, his household, his tribe. That is the church. That is the city of God at this time. And so being faithful, it's a religious order and institution primarily. And so he sets up the altar to practice the worship of God. So Abraham builds an altar to the Lord who appeared to him. This is not a Hellenic generic principle or monad. This is a personal God who can appear within time and space. Can the number 7, does it come down to you and make a covenant with you? No. Does the monad come down and make a covenant with you? No. But a personal God can, and that's why we aren't following Hellenism here when we talk about the fact that this is a personal God. Abraham journeyed then towards the south, and he's prepping then to take the promised land. But first, he encounters a famine. And where does he go? Egypt. Interesting. So on the way to the promised land, they go down to Egypt. And providentially, this happens because there's a famine. So the Jews are in Egypt. And then Abraham leaves. Abraham becomes a type of Israel. Israel will leave Egypt just like Abraham left Egypt. There was a Noahide dude that I was debating 3 days ago in my Discord. And he said, there's no types in the Old Testament. I said, so Abraham going to Egypt and then leaving Egypt isn't a type of Israel going to Egypt later on, 480 years later and leaving? No. Come on, dude. Even rabbinical exegetes will say that these things are recurring motifs. Come on. So the famine was severe in the land, and it came to pass that when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai, his wife, indeed, you are a beautiful woman. Sarai was a babe, and he's worried that them Egyptians are going to start checking that stuff out. I want that. Give me that. Gives me that. We was kings be like, give me that girl, yo. Abraham's like, better say that you're my sister because they're going to kill me. Therefore, it will happen when the Egyptians see you that they will say, it's his wife, kill him. So Abraham engages in some deception. He says, say that you're my sister. Therefore, it will be well with you for my sake, and I will live because of you. So it was when Abram came to Egypt that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. And the princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh. And then the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. Now he treated Abram well for her sake and gave Abraham sheep, oxen, donkeys, male, and servants and camels. So he gives a bunch of gifts, right? Well, the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abraham's wife. Who could not see that this is a type of what happens with Moses in Egypt? Even to the point of plagues. Obviously, this is foreshadowing to what will happen with the Jews in Egypt. The next book of the Bible will be about this. So what I'm getting at here is a point that we refute the Talmudic position with when we stress that even within the Old Testament, and even within one book of the Old Testament, within Genesis, there's types. Who cannot recognize that this situation with Abram is a type of what Israel will experience in Egypt in the next book. And by the way, there's going to be another instance of going into Egypt. Joseph, right? Now, the plagues, again, Moses brings the plagues on Egypt as curses. I will curse those who curse you. I will bless those who bless you. So this is God basically fulfilling his side of the covenant, right? His stipulations, saying that if you obey me, I will curse those who curse you. Then Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say it's your sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now, therefore, here is your wife. Go away." Right? So all these plagues come. So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning Abram. They sent him away, his wife, and all that he had. So the point being, again, that this is a type of the coming situation where the Jews will have to go down to Egypt. They'll become slaves of the Egyptians. And then that prepares the way for Moses. That is what? A type of what? Of us. Of salvation. The land of Egypt is you and your sins. You're a slave to your sins. Your sins and the demons are your taskmasters who are whipping you, keeping you addicted to whatever you're addicted to. Right? It's not just a one-time event. It's your whole lifetime where you're trying to purge yourself of these taskmasters. Abraham went up from Egypt to the south, and he and his wife and Lot and all that were with him. Abraham was very rich and had much cattle, silver, and gold. So here the blessing is physical, but it's also spiritual, right? It's not just physical. A lot of dumb evangelicals get this mistaken heretical idea that, everything in the Old Testament is physical, and then Jesus brings everything spiritual. No, it's physical and spiritual. It's just that the emphases are different, right? So if you're rich in this world, it's because God has blessed you. And you are expected to use that as a steward of God's gifts to you for good purposes. If you just spend it on yourself and your pleasures, you are a bad steward of the gifts that God has given you. But nevertheless, if you have wealth, as St. John Chrysostom says, God gave that to you. So blessings are both spiritual and physical in this life. Now, after Jesus, just like they were back then, it's just that the emphasis is different. It's not no longer physical. We're not Gnostics. Stop with the Gnosticism. So Abraham went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent was at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar that he made at the beginning. And there Abraham began to call on the name of the Lord, Abraham called on the name of the Lord. And Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. But the land was not able to support both of them, so that they might dwell together for their possessions, for they were so great that they could not dwell together. And so strife arose between the herdsmen of Abraham's livestock and those of Lot. And therefore now the Canaanites and the Perizzites who dwell in this land at this time also. So Abraham said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between me and you." Abraham is a peaceful peacemaker here. And so he says, you take the land that you want. So we see the humility of Abraham. And yes, Abraham is cunning, and as we'll see, many saints are cunning, but he's also humble, and he's also righteous, and he's also defers. He has no problem saying, all right, look, you want that? Go ahead. Right? That's an instance of his humility and righteousness. He says, you take the left, I'll take the right, or if you want the right, then I'll go to the left. You choose. So Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the plain of Jordan, and it was well watered. This was before the Lord had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, and it was like the garden of God. So we have a likening here of the Garden of Eden. So Lot is attracted to the things of this life, right? He's in many ways a symbol of a person who is constantly enticed by the ways of this world. We know Lot's a righteous man. He's not evil. He does mess up. He makes some mistakes, obviously. But it's just showing us that the righteousness of Abraham surpasses that of Lot. Even though Lot is a righteous man, Abraham is a more righteous man. And so Lot prefers the choice land, and Abraham
says, okay, you can have it. So Abraham goes and dwells in the land of Canaan, but Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent, his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful before God. So Lot is kind of being sort of drawn into the ways of this world, into wickedness. God said to Abram, after Lot separated from him, lift up your eyes now and look, and I will show you the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, westward. And all the land that you see I will give to you and your seed forever. And I will make your seed as the dust of the earth, and so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your seed also could be numbered. Arise and walk in the land through its length and its breadth, for I will give it to you. Then Abraham moved his tent, and he went and dwelt by the oak of Mamre in Hebron, and he built the altar there to the Lord. So we have a moving altar, a movable altar, this being, because Abraham's household tribe is the church at this time, and they're a liturgical tribe moving, worshiping the Lord. They're the one true church at this time. And so he splits from Lot. It doesn't mean Lot's evil. It's just that Lot is kind of an emblem of somebody who prefers the things of this life. And Abraham is clinging to God and doing explicitly what God says. He's neither turning to the left hand nor to the right, but following the correct path. Is he doing that by his own works? No, he's doing that because of grace, because he possesses theosis and he's actually seeing the theophanies, God himself, right? But he's also utilizing his will and doing good works, right? Which are impelled and moved by grace, not to the exclusion of human will, right? The human will still is operant. It's never lost. And there's always synergy here. So what I'm saying is that even in the situation of Abraham, which is Paul's example of a gracious covenant, there's still the human will operant. Abraham still has to obey. And by the way, by Genesis 22, we will have explicit statements where God says, you must obey me. You will teach your children these ordinances. So there are still stipulations in Genesis 22. Lot's capture and rescue. Now, there's going to be some interesting battles and stories here. So there's going to Abraham actually is going to kind of form a militia, and he's going to go to battle, and he's going to rescue some people, which is a pretty wild adventure story here. And then we're going to get Genesis 15, which is God's covenant with Abram. And the covenant here is going to include much more revelation, right? We're going to get a bigger piece of the puzzle, piece of the picture of who God is, what's going on, what the overall plan is, and who the Messiah is that's going to fulfill all these promises to Abraham. So I'm going to talk in part 2 about Genesis 14, the battle to rescue Lot, and the character of Melchizedek. So let's talk about Melchizedek. I'll save the Lot part for part 2 and then Genesis 15 for part 2, but we do want to mention Melchizedek because he's an important figure, because he's another Gentile. He's not a Jew, who is somehow a mysterious priest of God. How is there a priest of God in Salem, Jerusalem? He is the priest of God at Canaan's land somehow. There's a righteous priest there. And he's the king of Salem who will bring out bread and wine. Can you obviously not see? This is a type of the Eucharist. And who is Jesus? Jesus is a priest after the order of Melchizedek. Now, in Orthodox theology, let's be clear. I don't know why people get confused about this. This is not Jesus. Melchizedek is not Jesus. He's a type of Jesus. They're not the same person. I don't know why people come up with this. I think the only reason people think this is because it says that he is without genealogy. It just means it's without listed genealogy. It doesn't mean he has no genealogy, right? So Hebrews says that Melchizedek, this mysterious person, has no list of genealogy. It just means that it's not written who he descended from. We don't know. It doesn't mean that he's not a human. And by the way, all the goofy sects and cults, Latter-day people, they try to say, oh, we have the Melchizedekian priesthood. No, you don't. The Orthodox Church is the Melchizedekian priesthood because it's the priesthood of Christ, and it's the priesthood of Christ that descends from the people that Jesus instituted as his successive presbyters.
the successors to the apostles, you see.
The king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley, and his return from the slaughter of Kedorlaomer, and the kings with him. Now, Melchizedek was the king of Salem. This will later be Jerusalem. So he's a type of Christ, the king of Jerusalem. And he comes out to meet Abraham with bread and wine. And he was the priest of God. He blessed Abraham and said, "Blessed be Abraham, God Most High, the creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be the God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands." So Abraham gave him a tenth of all.
So he tithed to Melchizedek.
Now the king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give me your people and keep the Calvary for me the people and keep the Calvary for yourself." But Abraham said to the king of Sodom, "I have raised my hand to God Most High, the creator of heaven and earth, that I will take nothing of yours from a thread of sandal strap, lest you should say that you made Abraham rich, except only what the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men with me, Anar, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them take their portion." So Abraham is basically saying to the king of Sodom, you're not going to be able to say that you made me rich. God gave us the victory. You don't get any of the credit for this. But the mysterious figure of Melchizedek, the priest, as we'll see explained in the book of Hebrews, Hebrews 5 and Hebrews 7, he is a type of Christ because he is not a priest of the Levitical order. He's not a descendant of Aaron. As you know, as we'll see as we get into Exodus and Leviticus, the priesthood is only the descendants of Aaron, right? Moses' brother Aaron. And they will become the Levitical priesthood, right? The sons of Levi. But here we have priesthood still existing prior to all that. And some true church still existing amongst Gentiles here. Somehow. We don't know how, but mysteriously. That's why this is a powerful apologetic usage by the New Testament writers to say these are images telling you, in the Old Testament even, about the way that the religion of the true God will go to the Gentiles. Because there were already emblems of this, foreshadowings of this during the Old Testament period, all the way back to Noah, all the way back to Job, all the way back to Melchizedek. Melchizedek is a priest of God, not part of the Levitical priesthood. It's a mystery. We don't know everything about Melchizedek, but we know that it was the case. And we know that the book of Hebrews, so let's look at that before we close up this installment. Now, again, this is a little bit difficult because we haven't, if you're new to a lot of this, if you don't know Genesis or the Bible very well, then you don't know about the Levitical priesthood. You don't know about Leviticus. I just finished rereading Leviticus, by the way. So this is all fresh in my mind. We read Leviticus last week. Now, I'd read Leviticus many times before, but it had been probably 5 years since I read Leviticus. So it was, the thing about the Bible is that every time you go back to it, you will always see new things, right? Because you're imbibing this whole text. And when you go back and you read Genesis or Leviticus, the things that you read in the New Testament maybe a year before will inform your understanding of what you read in the Old Testament. And then when you read the New Testament, what you read 3 years, 2 years, 1 year before from the Old Testament will inform you again on the New Testament. And it's a never-ending sort of process that's always enlightening and informing you. There's no book like this. It's amazing. I mean, the depth of this is just phenomenal. And that's another one of the reasons that we know it's divinely inspired. I mean, there's many reasons, but one reason, one evidence of this, that's an attestation to the inspiration of it, is that there's no way that a bunch of dudes just sort of, came up with the level of depth at work here. And the more that you've studied the scriptures, the more you see that. It's just amazing. If you've read the texts of other world religions, it's not like that at all. I mean, if you've read Bhagavad Gita or if you've read, these other religious texts, Quran or whatever, it's very different. But we read in Hebrews 5 that not only is the Levitical priesthood and the high priest a type of Christ and his work, but Melchizedek is also an image of Christ and his work. Every priest is taken from among men and appointed for men in the things that pertain to God, that he might offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. For he can have compassion upon those who are ignorant and going astray, since he himself is also subject to weakness. But because of this, he is required for the people and also for himself to offer sacrifices for sins. And no man takes this right upon himself, but is called by God for this, just as Aaron was. So you can't appoint yourself to be a priest or a minister or a presbyter. And this nullifies all the Protestants and all the evangelicals, because they assume to themselves the right to teach and preach and to be offerers of the sacraments. You don't have the right to do that. It has to be according to the succession of those that Christ appointed. So also Christ did not glorify himself to become a high priest, but it was said to him, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." And it was said in another place, "You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek," who in the days of his humanity, when he had offered up prayers and supplications and vehement cries and tears to the Father who was able to save him from death, was heard because of his godly fears. Talking about Jesus. And even though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things that he suffered. And having been perfected, he became the author of salvation to all who obey him. And he was called by God a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek, of whom we have much to say, and it is hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing. For by now you should have been teachers. You need someone again to teach you the basic principles of God. For everyone who partakes of milk is unskilled in the word, and he is a baby. So by the way, this is telling you that you should be teachers. It's not saying everybody has the right to teach, but everybody should be at the level. His audience, he's saying, should not be falling into basic ignorance on the Bible. I guess the writer of Hebrews is a Protestant because he's saying you should have known the Bible. No, I'm sorry, it's not Protestant to know the Bible. In fact, St. John Chrysostom castigates his congregation constantly for not reading their Bible. There's nothing Protestant about reading the Bible. He says, solid food belongs to those who are of full age, but you need baby milk because you don't know theology. I thought we were not supposed to know theology. Oh, no, the Bible says you do need to know theology. Then it goes on to talk about in chapter 7, for this Melchizedek was the king of Salem, and he was the priest of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a tithe, a tenth of all, and he was called the king of righteousness. And he's also called the king of Salem, meaning king of peace, prince of peace, right? Without father, without mother, and without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, he remains a priest forever continually. It doesn't say he's the Son of God, but made like the Son of God. And it's saying that he doesn't have father, mother, or genealogy listed in the text. It's not saying he's some eternal fourth person of the Godhead or some, God figure. He's a human being who is a mysterious figure who's a type of Christ. That's all it means. And by the way, the Orthodox iconographic tradition pictures Melchizedek in an icon. So we don't believe that he is Jesus. Consider how great this man was. He's a man to whom even the patriarch Abraham gave a tenth of his spoils. And indeed, those who are the sons of Levi, that's the Aaronic priesthood, who receive the priesthood have a commandment to receive tithes from the people according to the law, that is, according from their brethren, though they have come from the loins of Abraham, but whose genealogy is not derived from them, and yet he received tithes from Abraham. He's saying that Abraham's descendants were in his loins, meaning that they were his seed in him, like in potentia, right? They had not been born yet. And if Abraham, from whom all of the Levitical priests descend, tithes to Melchizedek, how great is Melchizedek, you see. Therefore, if there was perfection that could be had through the Levitical priesthood, then why would there need to be another priest to rise according to the order of Melchizedek? But you see the prophecy from Psalm, depending on whether you use the Septuagint or not, Psalm 109:4, if you have the Orthodox Study Bible. Psalm 2:7. Psalm 2:7. You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. That's a prediction of the Messiah. Why would there need to be another priest predicted by David? This is centuries after Abraham. David says, prophesying, that the Messiah will be a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. If you could be perfected through the Mosaic Levitical priesthood, why would there need to be a priest according to the order of Melchizedek? That's predicting the Messiah. For if the priesthood being changed, of necessity there is also a change of the law. And that's what Jesus came to do, was to fulfill the office and function of the old ceremonial Levitical administration and to bring in the Melchizedekian administration, namely the church. Now, that doesn't mean that there's nothing in the Levitical administration that's a type of the church. Obviously, all of it is. The high priest, the Day of Atonement, that's a type of Christ. The book of Hebrews says. The book of Hebrews says they both are. The high priest, the Aaronic high priest, as well as the Melchizedekian priesthood, right? It's all pointing to Christ is the point. And that's what Hebrews 7 is arguing about this section of Genesis with Melchizedek. So as I said, next we will look at Genesis 15. There's a lot of meat in Genesis 15 that we want to dissect. That'll be in part 2. We'll go back to the adventure of Lot's rescue. And then we will move to Hagar and Ishmael, which will play heavily into Galatians 4, Paul's allegory of Galatians 4 that comes out of Genesis 16. And we'll even see a surprising theophany with Hagar. Hagar sees God as well. And then we'll look at Genesis 17, which is the sign of the covenant, right? Genesis 17 is where we get circumcision. Oh, circumcision, right? Controversial subject. Well, it's not controversial if you know what it symbolizes and what it signifies. And then we will look at the theophanies in Genesis 18, which play heavily into a lot of Orthodox iconography and theology. And we'll see that there's 2 angels and the Lord. So there is 2 messengers, and in Genesis 19:1, it's stated very clearly to be the Lord and 2 angels. So that is the Logos. It is a pre-incarnate theophany of the Logos, and we will see many of those. We just saw that as the Lord appeared to Abraham in Genesis 12, and we'll see more of these as the Lord will continue to appear to Abraham in the amazing life of Abraham. And if you want to, you can support with Super Chats. I see some Super Chats we'll read here, a few. You can also join below here at YouTube in the membership section if you want part 2 of this. The part 2 with Jamie and H.G. Wells will be up tomorrow. The part 2 of this will be either tomorrow or the day after. And I think we will have Boiler Room in an hour. So if you guys want to, if I don't do Boiler Room on my channel, I'll put the link up in the community tab for where you can listen to Boiler Room at Alternate Current Radio. Of course, you can always go over to Alternate Current Radio if you want to listen just on the audio. I'll put that link in there for you guys as well if we don't do a live stream Boiler Room here on my channel. So 250 nerds tonight. Welcome, everybody. As we are gradually progressing through Exodus, I don't have any way to gauge how long it's going to take to get all the way through the entire scriptures. I might die right tomorrow. Who knows? We don't know. I may be dead by the time we get to Numbers. I don't know. I may be dead by the time we get to Jude. Hey Jude, don't I make it better? I don't really like Paul McCartney's songs. I'm just screwing around. All right, let's look at these super chats. John Miles Baptiste, $2. When are we going to get some slick merchandise? We were just talking about that this week. Yes, we do need to. I've got some ideas in my head. Double-headed eagle, Jay's analysis. T-shirts, I think those will be the first ones to come out. We'll do the double-headed eagle, Jay's analysis. Watch all the evangelicals will be like, I told you he was a Mason. He's Illuminati. He's got a double-headed eagle on his T-shirt. That's proof he's Illuminati. Even though it has nothing to do with Freemasonry. It's the symbol of Byzantium. So we were talking about that this week, getting into the merch. So thank you for reminding me, John Miles Baptiste. Metropolitan Ralph Groyper, $10. Great stream, Jay. Did you see the craziness going on in the Church of Montenegro? I believe this is just the NATO model of what they're doing in the Ukraine, and now they're just doing the same thing. I think that's what you're talking about. Yes, so I should have Jim Jotras back on, and we'll talk about that. So NATO, CIA, they're just doing the same thing, and it's run the same gameplay, right? And people fall for it. They don't know it's the same thing over and over and over. But thank you for that, Metropolitan Ralph Groiper. Hopefully you guys begin to see that Abraham is a great patriarch. He's not a proof of Calvinism. Zachariah Harp, $20. Thank you, Zachariah. Wow. Fat super chat. Much appreciated for that. Shout out goes to our boy, Zachariah Harp. Ian 0223 199. Is the Book of Giants accepted in Orthodoxy? Is that the Book of Enoch? I don't know what the Book of Giants is, but no. The Book of Enoch, you could argue, it contains tradition because the Gospel of Jude cites it. But if you mean, the letter of Jude cites it. But if you mean, is the Book of Enoch canonical? Technically, no. Ian, again, 0223 says, are you familiar with Revealed Apologetics? He is a Calvinist presuppositionalist debater. I would love to see you two have a conversation. He seems like a decent guy. I am not. But we always open up the Discord every week to people who want to come and debate. So if he wants to come and debate, we're not going to give any more platforms to clowns. So we do now have criteria. So if you want to debate me, the criteria are publicly, we're not platforming any goofuses. If you want to be platformed, you have to have a degree of some kind. These are all upon my analysis and determination. I make the decision for who I platform and debate. You have to have, if you don't have that, or if you do, a book or a significant following, and I must determine that you're not a clown. Those are the criteria for who I will debate in the future. And if you don't make it into the professional ranks, if you're a aspiring hothead, I'm joking. If you're a learning debater and you hate me so much you want to take me down, we open up the Discord every week for the training, the up-and-coming training courses who want to come debate. Come take me down. We open it up all the time. And by the way, that's also subject to moderation, and I ban you if I want to. So, because it's mine. And if you don't do that, you get a zillion trolls. So, but if Revealed Apologetics, if he does not meet the criteria and he wants to debate, he can come to the Discord. 7 Emmanuel 7 10 Canadian. Thank you, bro. Very helpful. God bless you in your house. Well, God bless you, 7 Emmanuel. Much appreciated. We appreciate that support. Hopefully everybody is learning from the Genesis talks. And the goal of this will be to, as we cover the entire scripture, we will have not just the lectures on the Republic, right? I lectured to the totality of the Republic. We will have the lectures on 40 plus books of the top global elite, right? We will have the Tragedy and Hope lectures, the giant 1,300 page tome. We will have the lectures then on the entire Bible. So we want to have a body of work that cannot be gainsaid. That even if you despise me with all of your heart, you will know that I busted my butt and I did some damn reading and some damn work. Quiet Convert 1535 $5. Incredibly informative lecture, Jay. Thank you. The next step is a Jay's Analysis subscription. Absolutely. Much appreciated. You get a vast archive. We have built up a vast archive in merely 4 years of doing the subscription service. So be sure to, if you do not want to, there's advantages of subscribing to my site. This content's the same. You don't get any new content either way. But of course, if YouTube goes away in 2 years, 5 years, you want access, you need to subscribe at my site. So it's very easy if you want to. The app of YouTube now has the subscription. You can join on YouTube just from the Join app. And then what you do is you click over to the Community tab, and that's where I post the part 2s. So you should be able to scroll back down a good ways. I think on the app, it's limited how far back you can scroll. But if you join if you go on your PC and you go to the Community tab, you should be able to. I've gotten I think the last probably maybe 30 talks across the board, and maybe more, maybe 40 or 50. I have the part ones and the part twos. So you at least have access to those. You also get access to people can log in. If you message me in the community tab there, if you're a member, I can send you the login at the website too. Unless you get if you get the first level, you don't get that. You got to be the second level or more to get all that, because it's a little bit cheaper just to get that first level. But thank you. I think you will find the archives are a treasure trove. I mean, there's a lot of work at the archives. I mean, we got a lot of talks. You can get a master's degree, PhD level education at my website in multiple fields for $5 a month. I mean, can't beat that. That's what we offer. That's the thing that we try to offer people, is an unparalleled education in multiple fields for very, very cheap. And it's unparalleled. I mean, there are plenty of people out there doing what we do in various fields who do good work. But I mean, I'm like, trying to do multiple fields and give people like a really good classical education, biblical education, philosophic education, global elite education, right? We're trying to pioneer some really heavy stuff here. And we don't get the algorithmic promotion that we used to. So please, if you would, share the materials. Dalton, $3. Can you talk about who the wise men were? Well, we don't really know. I mean, there's just traditions that it's, Balthazar, Melchior, right? These are traditional ideas that's who these guys were called. And, it'll be mentioned in some of the church fathers, but we don't really know exactly who the wise men were and what they were. There's wise men of the East. They could have been Chinese. They could have been Persians. There's a tradition that, one of them is, if you watch Jesus of Nazareth by Franco Zeffirelli, it's Donald Pleasance plays Balthazar, and he's a Nestorian, not Nestorian, the great Zoroaster. He's a Zoroastrian who sees and believes in Jesus, right? So I don't know. We don't know. White Top, 1953, $2. Thank you, White Top. Much appreciated. Alfonso Corral, $5. Right on, brother. More Lux? Lux Veritas. All right. Thank you, guys.